Our next theme for the Better Photography Weekly Challenge is multiple exposure. Our judge and mentor is Natasha Hemrajani. She's a visual artist and photographer who counts surrealist painter Salvador Dali and the work of Man Ray as her earlier influences. Since 2005, she has been a contract photojournalist for the Hindustan Times, following which she has served as photo editor of Grazia for its launch here in Mumbai. Her work has been published in The Guardian, Vogue, Caravan, The Mint, Better Photography, Harper's Bazaar, Elle, and The Times UK, amongst others. Natasha has also mentored workshops, classes on various programs of photography, emerging visual practices, and photojournalism at Met University, the Sophia Polytechnique, Ecole Institute Lab, and Magic Lantern Festival. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Neelufar. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a judge and mentor on one of my favorite subjects, actually, in photography, which is multiple exposure. And hello, everyone else. I hope everyone's fine and safe and doing good. And let's get started, huh?
Yes.
Okay, so as the name suggests, multiple photography is a style that basically involves a layering of two or more images to form a sort of cohesive or consolidated whole. In the past, it was often referred to, interestingly enough, as spirit photography, because, the old days cameras were manual and films were exposed in the dark room. And this often led to like a particular style of like ghost-like or dreamy images. And that typically characterized, multiple exposures, AKA spirit photography, especially when you sort of use the human face in any of these things. Of course, in the old days, it was much harder to produce a double exposure because a lot of this work had to be done, all of this work had to be done completely manually, and people relied on film stock and darkroom processes. And if you got it wrong, then you just had to go back and like do it all over again. And the amount of time it takes, to take the shot, to go back and expose the shot, and then go back to the darkroom and make it. So it took a lot of work, and we have to give the early masters a lot of credit for that. Definitely one of my loves, as you mentioned, was Man Ray. And while I haven't prepared his images, a simple search on the internet can show you his work. He's a master of the genre. So it took a lot of work back then. But where we are today is it's quite easy. There are lots of ways of doing it. Digital makes this incredibly fun. And whether you want to be old school and sort of really use your camera and go out there and set it on manual exposure mode and go and put two images together, or whether you're using a cell phone and there's an app that does it for you, or whether you take it back to like Adobe, the modern darkroom, and sort of do it, by hand, is all up to you. It's a creative process. There are no judgments on how you come up with it. The only sort of guiding rule is that you make art. So having said that, in that spirit, let's talk about the kind of work that I have done with multiple exposure, and let's not let the format get in the way. As you know, my personal work has always been very partial to multiple exposure and surreal imagery. And this kind of comes from my basic philosophy that nothing really is as it seems. There's always a deeper and an even deeper essence below what you see. And this sort of abstractness of thought and my own spirit often finds its way into my work. So one of the very first and the earliest series I began with was a series called Hello, Goodbye. This was shot entirely on the iPhone, and this series eventually made its way to the Delhi Photo Festival. It explored the changing and sort of eternal face of a city that I love, which is Bombay, aka Mumbai, a city I grew up in. This was in the early 80s. And, I think after they changed the name to Mumbai, Bombay is quickly becoming a city I barely recognize now in 2020s. So the format of multiple exposure was perfect for this particular idea because it unraveled the sort of accelerated pace of change the city is seeing, where old structures are disappearing or being buried under new, hastily made ones overnight. And Hello, Goodbye is sort of a passing through a taxi view of what you see out of your window and may never see again when you pass by that way, but you greet it with affection nonetheless, especially because its existence is fragile and it's fleeting. So one of the first images in the series is, in town in Hutatma Chowk. And you can see this sort of a double exposure of this image here. But this particular style was not really two different images composited together. It was the same image distorted within the image, because I think what's happening in the city is sort of a mirroring of form. You know, you have an existing building, and on top of that, people just impose something on top, and it's sort of like you want to make a fried egg, but you end up cracking the egg and you end up making an omelet. So I think that's where this style of like exposure comes from. The next image is in Jijamata Udyan. I'm a townie, so a lot of these places are very, very nostalgic for me. This is classic old Bombay mill land where people lived in sort of these collective chawl houses, you know, balconies close together, a unified corridor connecting everyone. And quickly, this is being taken over by all these ghastly, like branded stores below. So it's sort of a layering of the old and the new in the same space. The third image is St. Andrew's Church in Bandra. Around this time, or a little earlier, there was a big discussion by the BMC about destroying a vast, you know, sort of tract of area outside St. Andrews because they wanted to make space for parking. And I mean, this is a heritage structure. You know, the kind of structure that they wanted to raise down was 200 years old. So it really goes to show that in the city, we don't particularly value a lot of things that maybe we should be valuing, and a sense of priorities are a bit distorted. And that's why the distortion of the church and the image itself. I wanted to also sort of imbue it with a sense of, you know, it quickly becoming a ghost of itself, because at the time, there wasn't a lot of surety whether the structures would stay. The final image in the series is, of course, the Worli Sea Link. For people that have appreciated the view of, you know, Worli Sea Link, well, before the Sea Link, I think the Sea Link now has sort of just been imposed on us. And I wanted to sort of fill it with the beauty of what it used to be and also the form of where it is now. And we're really not sure where it will be in the future. So the next body of work that I want to talk about is actually an art residency that I was invited to produce by the High Street Phoenix Mall at Palladium. This series was shot on the iPhone again, but this is more of a classic double exposure because I had to go take a picture and then go to the next location and expose the same frame and then check if I got it right. And if it didn't work, then go back and do it all over again. So the mall really wanted to celebrate its 15th anniversary or something like that. I'm very bad with dates and numbers. And it struck me while I was there in the residency how the entire mall was just this imagery that formed an invisible architecture of aspiration. It was completely cut off from the reality of what it is to be Indian, right from the skin tone. All the models in the store windows are, without exception, not Indian. They're white, they're Caucasian, they're blonde, or they're very Nordic looking. And even the sort of imagery in all the stand-up posters in the shops and the roundabout architecture of the mall itself that forces you to sort of traverse this entire length, regardless of where you want to go, whether you want to go out, whether you want to go in, find the toilet, or even like go somewhere in particular. So the very first image in the series is, of course, this extremely dashing looking man in a suit and the architecture of the invisible mall imposed on him, an inescapable style of, you know, who you are supposed to be becoming or aspiring to buy into becoming when you enter. And to continue, our very striking looking models, the beautiful face of these stunning white women, just sort of like pasted over the architecture of the mall itself. I mean, nothing of these models is in any way representative of us. So when you walk in Palladium, you really don't know whether you are, I mean, you don't think you are in India, you could be in Paris or you could be in London. And I found that a very jarring and strange way to construct a public space. Of course, something about this picture I found incredibly funny because right outside her is, you know, Bombay, which is still being destroyed in the background. And in the name of construction, the skyline is pretty defaced. So there's all this beauty inside, and it's from another world and from another place. And when you look out, you can sort of see the city that is still there, barely. And finally, of course, the Statue of Liberty at Parel, Bombay, which if it isn't like an absurd symbol of where we are today in our heads, I don't know what is. Another very interesting project that I worked on was also as an artist, this time for the Embassy of Brazil. They invited me to visit Brazil during Carnival and shoot Carnival celebrations through the eyes of an Indian woman photographer, coming from a culture and a country where it's not safe for women to wear skimpy clothes and dance and sing and celebrate on the streets all night long, and certainly not in the extremely sensual, liberal, and pro-sexual style that Brazilian women can and feel empowered enough to celebrate during Carnival. So these exposures blend the native geography of the Indian landscape. I mean, all the trees and the flora and the fauna you see is shot across various parts of India, from Kerala to Coorg to, Mysore and so on. While the women and the trans and the various people represented in the pictures are from Brazil itself. So my idea was really to make this a celebration of nature as an ultimate expression of the feminine force of life itself. And for me, I think that this very first image does that absolutely beautifully, because you can see the sort of like, well, there's the face of this beautiful young girl, and there's all of nature growing out from it, and the possibilities are sort of endless of who she wants to be, where she wants to go. This one was shot on the streets of a little town in Olinda, where women basically come together to dance all night long. They come alone. They don't even have to come in groups of like girlfriends like we would if we were going somewhere. And they're perfectly safe, and they can dance with perfect strangers, and it's all dance. And I think that's so beautiful, because when you look at nature, there is no restrictions on how flowers mingle or how forms intertwine or how, trees grow. And I find it very sad that as people, we've become so restricted in how we interact with one another. And I think the carnival is a beautiful expression of how it really feels to sort of go back to that space of being wild and being free. This particular image is a favorite of mine because the entire band of musicians that were performing at the time, and you can't see them because this is a solo picture of her, were all women. And they were all Black Brazilian women, and they were drummers and they were trumpeters, and they were just fabulous. And it was so empowering to be a woman in this scenario and see like 100-strong band marching down the street, and, live drums and music, and surrounded by all this force and energy. And that's really what I wanted to show, that women have the power to sort of be endless in what they choose to do when they're allowed to be free. And, no image in the carnival would be complete without the actual spirit of carnival, which is basically people hook up. So this is the kiss. And these two met while they were dancing. They did not know who, the other person was. And I guess they were very attracted to one another because they decided to go for it. And I think there's something beautiful about that, where there is no censure. And I think that's why I wanted to fill it with an open sky and with trees and, with the sort of freedom that you only see really in nature, but which would be so lovely if we saw it with people. The last, presentation that I will make for my body of work is something that I collaborated with the artists from Cirque du Soleil on. They were visiting Bombay for a show, and I really wanted to make something with them. And I'm actually very passionate about doing something for the many causes that I'm interested in. And I really wanted to do something with art for a cause, and so did they. And we decided to work on really marine pollution. So these were some lovely artists that came together and decided to collaborate on what's happening in our oceans today. So this particular picture is shot at Warsaw, the fish drying stands and in Warsaw village. That's like, I don't know, thousands of bombil drying there at the back. But the bombil that is fished in waters that is full of plastic, absolutely full of trash. And I don't know if it's a kindness for them to actually be fished and dead or to live like that. So we have the artists, and there they are, all wrapped in plastic, and a superimposition of marine life at the back. The next image has these two acrobats again from Cirque du Soleil. We want to talk about the water crisis and how nobody's really talking about how India is going to be facing severe water shortage, and so is Bombay. Our ground resources are drying up. So this was shot in a ridiculously rich gated colony, but the pool was empty. And I think that says it all. You built this space for luxury, but there is no resource to actually maintain it. And all the water sort of double exposed in the sky. There's a bird there, but that's actually the ocean behind the trees. The last image is again to do with overfishing and the needless sort of waste of marine life. And we have the two artists in nets and all the bombil and wonderfully superimposed fish that I found at the back. I hope that these images are more, I wanted them to be something that you could hang on a wall and sort of ponder over and not get too lost in abstraction with. So coming to the end of my work, the earliest exploration of multiple exposure, began with exploring the idea of movement or locomotion, specifically in animals. And people were very fascinated by how animals move. And even further back, I guess you could check Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man sketch that explores, the contours of the human body. So I don't want to get into too much of the history of how various artists over time have explored multiple exposure, because, a random search on Wikipedia today will give you like tons of information on the history of this form and where we are with it right now. So I don't want to make a very long drawn out lecture on this. What I do want to say is that double or multiple exposure is an art form that you can think about spanning, in fact, many genres. Think about music, for instance. What is music if not multiple exposure? You lay notes and instruments and beats and pauses one above and below and alongside each other, and this eventually forms a cohesive whole. If you extrapolate it further, what is cooking? You take ingredients, you put them together at different times, you treat them differently, and eventually it becomes one whole. In the end, what is art? So when you realize that multiple exposure is in fact a way to make a cohesive meaning out of something, and it's your personal meaning, whether it's a cake you bake or a song you write or a dance you perform, you can actually let your creativity free to explore it. And you can say what you want to say, in this case, using the medium of photography. My personal rules for creating anything are actually a long series of don'ts. Well, not so long, but a series of don'ts. The first rule for me is always don't be boring. The second rule is don't follow rules if you can break them with some style. And the third is don't be unoriginal. One of my favorite quotes is actually by a poet whose work I don't like very much because he was sexist and quite strange. But this particular quote, I think, sums up everything that I feel about art. It goes, style is the answer to everything. It's a fresh way to approach a dull or a dangerous thing. To do a dull thing with style is preferable to doing a dangerous thing without it. And to do a dangerous thing with style is what I call art. So I hope this was interesting and helpful, and go out there and be dangerous and be stylish and make some art.